Erfahrung. Ich war ein Gegner der Partei, wie die ganze Familie bei uns.
By the time this conversation took place, the pressure was mounting for Heidegger, as it was for everyone else in Germany. The war was turning into a rout, and Hitler's days were clearly numbered. On November the 27th, 1944, Freiburg was subjected to a massive bombing raid, and the university, which sustained heavy damage, had to be abandoned. The philosophy department relocated en masse to Castle Wildenstein, a medieval fortress overlooking the upper Danube Valley, while Heidegger himself was put up a few miles away by one of his favourite students, Princess Margot von Sachsen-Meiningen, with whom he was having an affair. He stayed in the princess's hunting lodge for several months, keeping well away from Freiburg until he could tell how he might be treated by the French troops, who'd taken charge of the city.
Sein Verhalten 1933 war ja dann für viele ein Anstoß, und da wusste er nicht, wie es ihm ergehen wird. Darum hat er sich in diesen ersten Wochen nach Kriegsende praktisch versteckt.
As it turned out, Heidegger was quite right to be concerned. Within a few weeks of Freiburg's surrender, French officials arrived at his home on the outskirts of the city. They carefully surveyed the house and its contents, and then informed Elfriede Heidegger, who was living there alone, that the property would be requisitioned for use by Allied personnel, because its owner was known to have been a leading Nazi Party member. This threat was soon lifted, thanks to a certain amount of string-pulling by Heidegger's friends. But the philosopher could see the way things were going, and he soon decided to return to Freiburg and face the music.
Herr Dr. Heidegger, Sie wurden am 21. April 1933 zum Rektor der Universität.
He duly appeared in front of a special denazification commission, composed of members of the university faculty who'd been opposed to the Nazi regime.
Stehen Sie zu dieser Aussage?
Diese Fragen sind nicht fair.
He was subjected to rigorous questioning, but he put up a spirited defence to all the accusations levelled at him, and the proceedings dragged on for several months without any firm conclusions emerging. Eventually, to try to resolve matters once and for all, the commission members wrote to a former colleague of Heidegger's, the respected philosopher Karl Jaspers, asking what course of action he would recommend. Jaspers replied that Heidegger's unfree and dictatorial mode of thinking meant he should be banned from teaching for 5 years, and this is precisely what the French military authorities eventually decreed. The true effect their action had on him has only recently become clear.
Heidegger hat selbst ja einem Biografen gesagt, er sei zusammengebrochen im Zuge dieser ganzen Untersuchungen. Er stellt das aber in einer Weise dar, die nicht haltbar ist. Er ist in der Tat zusammengebrochen, er war suizidgefährdet, ist gerettet worden und hat dann einen mehrmonatigen Aufenthalt antreten können mit Hilfe seines väterlichen Freundes, des Erzbischofs Konrad Gröber aus Meßkirch, der ja für ihn wichtig gewesen ist von Anfang an, konnte er dort in einem Sanatorium wieder geheilt werden.
Heidegger was now at his lowest ebb, and yet within a few years he would stage a remarkable recovery. Almost as soon as the war ended, he began to be cited as a key intellectual influence by several up-and-coming philosophers, most notably Jean-Paul Sartre, whose book Being and Nothingness was conceived as a companion piece to Heidegger's Being and Time. When Heidegger resumed teaching again in the early 50s, the support of Sartre and other existentialist thinkers helped to re-establish him as a major academic star.
Es ist die Zeit, in der wir wohl in Deutschland allgemein als restaurative Zeit rechnen müssen. In dieser Zeit kommt er wie der Vogel aus der Asche, wie Phönix aus der Asche, zu neuem Leben und zu neuer Anerkennung, ja, zu einer unerwarteten, großen Anerkennung international. Das ist ein Wunder, so wie das deutsche Wirtschaftswunder ein Wunder sein mag, vielleicht.
The one person, other than Sartre, who did most to restore Heidegger's damaged reputation was his former lover, Hannah Arendt, who had been forced to leave Germany in the early 30s and settle in New York. There, in a small brownstone apartment on the Upper West Side where she lived with her husband, she had begun to produce the stream of writings that would make her famous as a penetrating commentator on Nazism, to which she would forever attach the often-quoted phrase, the banality of evil. At the end of the war, Arendt wrote a fierce letter to Karl Jaspers, calling Heidegger a potential murderer because of his treatment of Edmund Husserl. But when the former lovers met again face to face, her view of him softened. The meeting took place in Freiburg on the 7th of February 1950. Arendt was visiting the city in connection with work she was carrying out on behalf of a special body set up to recover Jewish property stolen by the Nazis. She sent Heidegger a note telling him of her arrival, and that evening he visited her in her hotel.
He memorialized the meeting with a poem, and she said that conversation took up as though no time had intervened. So I think you can see that this relationship existed on another plane as far as both of them were concerned than the worldly one in which the hotel was situated. She reports that he is contrite about his involvement with the Nazis, but not in any very knowing way, that he doesn't really understand himself and he doesn't understand the significance of what he's done. She'll exchange letters with Karl Jaspers in which they shrug their shoulders and say, it's his character. There's nothing to be done about it, like he's a fool. And in many ways he was.
Hannah Arendt never entirely forgave Heidegger for his Nazi past, but she does seem to have accepted most of his explanations for what he did during the Third Reich at face value. She worked tirelessly from 1950 onwards to promote his work in America, thereby completing his extraordinary rehabilitation.
Hannah Arendt had publicly taken position against the Nazis. She was known to be Jewish. She emigrated to America. The fact that she would defend Heidegger made it look as if there was finally nothing to reproach him with.
What is perhaps most troubling about Heidegger's post-war revival is that he never apologized for what he had done during the 30s, or uttered a clear denunciation of Hitler and his crimes. Even the murder of 6 million Jews was an event about which he seems to have felt no obligation to speak.
He resumes teaching, and literally the philosophic and literary world looks to him. Come on, speak out. Say something human on the horror, on the Shoah, on the genocide, on the Holocaust. Nothing. Nothing. Now that's where my bafflement and rage begins.
When Heidegger died in 1976, it was the sage who was remembered in all the obituaries, not the practicing Nazi. But as the full extent of his involvement with the Third Reich has come to light over the past 20 years, a painful reassessment of his place in the history of philosophy has slowly begun. It's still not clear what the verdict will finally prove to be. He may well come to be seen as the greatest thinker of our age, as his supporters predict. But it's also possible that the grave defects of his personality, his arrogance, pettiness, and lack of human feeling, will rob him of the status he thought he was destined to achieve.
There are a lot of cases of bad men writing interesting books, and Heidegger is just a spectacular case of that sort. He stumbled into a situation that he didn't have the character to get himself out of, and for the rest of history, he's always going to be stuck in the trap in which he mired himself.